Take a quick pause. Did you know that over 90% of you watching haven't hit the subscribe button yet? If you're enjoying this video, take a second to subscribe and hit the like button. It helps us bring you more gripping stories every day. Also, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments so we can see how far our stories are reaching. Your support really keeps us going. Now, let's jump back into the video. It had been 10 years since I last saw the old barn. 10 years since I stood beneath the sagging roofline, where rusted nails jutted from the warped cedar planks like warning teeth. 10 years since I left this town, burned out from too many fires, real and metaphorical, and drove west chasing clean air and anonymity. But when my father passed last winter, and the letter came with the lawyer's seal and my name on it, I knew I'd have to come back. The land was mine now, and with it, the responsibility of tearing down what was left. The barn sat at the back edge of the property, slumped like a drunk asleep at the edge of the woods. The wind had stripped most of the red paint away, exposing a patchwork of gray wood that looked more bone than timber. One of the double doors hung half off its hinge, swaying gently in the breeze. When I was a kid, that barn had felt enormous, a whole world of haylofts and hidden corners. Now it just felt haunted. The development company wanted the site cleared in 2 weeks. I had the permits, the equipment, and enough experience with controlled demolition to handle it myself. There was a small satisfaction in returning to manual work, rigging the support beams with tension cables, planning the stress points, deciding where the old structure would fall and how it would die. In firefighting, you never got that kind of control. Fires made their own decisions. Demolition was math. But as I prepped the site and walked the perimeter that first evening, I noticed something off. A broken branch near the eastern side. Footprints in the half-frozen dirt. A campfire ring. Old but not untouched. And when I stepped inside the barn the next morning, it was clear someone had been living there. There were blankets folded neatly in the hayloft, a few empty cans of food in a plastic crate, and a rusted coffee percolator still warm to the touch. Someone had used my father's barn as a hideout. I didn't say anything at first. The sheriff here, Colton Brigg, had been my best friend once, and I didn't feel like handing him some petty trespassing case. Colton and I had history, most of it buried but not forgotten. I figured I'd wait a day or two, post some warning signs, then see if the squatter moved on. No need to start trouble unless I had to. But trouble has a way of finding you when you're not looking for it. That night, as a storm rolled over the hills, I sat in the old farmhouse nursing a cup of instant coffee and listening to the wind scrape at the windows. The barn creaked in the distance, a low, aching sound like the groan of a tired animal. I should have gone to bed. Instead, I grabbed my flashlight, pulled on a jacket, and walked out into the dark. The rain had started by the time I reached the barn. I slipped through the half-open door and swept the beam of the flashlight across the main floor. Nothing moved, but when I climbed the ladder to the loft, I saw it. The blankets were gone. So was the crate. But in the corner, etched into the wall with something sharp, was a name. Her name. Emily. My wife. I stared at the letters for a long time, rainwater dripping from the brim of my cap. My hand trembled slightly as I ran my fingers over the grooves. It had been 7 years since she disappeared. No goodbye. Just a voicemail on my phone saying, "I need to go, Sam." I'm sorry. I spent months looking, years wondering, and now her name was here, carved into the wall of a decaying barn behind my father's house. That night, I barely slept. The storm raged against the roof, and my thoughts spun in 1,000 directions. I told myself it was coincidence, a different Emily, a stranger passing through. But I knew her handwriting. She had etched those letters herself. And below her name, in much fainter lines, was something else. Forgive me. Watch the fire. I started the demolition the next morning anyway. I told myself it was still a job. The structure needed to come down. I mapped out the roof trusses and crossbeams, marked the support posts, and began disassembling the west wall by hand. The excavator arrived that afternoon, a rented Cat 320 with a grapple attachment. I parked it by the fence line and locked it up for the night. If someone came back, I'd be ready. The second clue came on day 4. I found a box tucked behind a stack of rotted lumber. Inside were photographs. Old, weathered prints with curled edges. One showed Emily standing beside the barn, her arm around someone I couldn't see. Another showed her sitting in the loft, wrapped in those same blankets. But the third photo made my stomach twist. It was of Colton. He was younger, but not by much, wearing his deputy's uniform, holding a beer, smiling. And behind him, half hidden by shadow, was Emily. Their hands touched. I dropped the photo and sat hard on a pile of dry hay, the air tight in my chest. Memories rose uninvited. Colton and Emily laughing over backyard beers the way she always said. He reminded her of home, the way his eyes lingered too long when she wasn't looking. Or maybe when I wasn't. I took the photos into town that night. Drove slowly, windshield wipers slapping against the rain. The sheriff's station was mostly dark, but his office light was on. He looked up when I walked in, and for a second, I saw it. Guilt, recognition, fear. Maybe all three. I laid the photos on his desk, said nothing. He looked at them for a long time, jaw clenched, then finally said, "It wasn't supposed to go like this." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to give him the power of explaining away years of silence. I turned and left, leaving the door open behind me. He didn't follow. Back at the house, the power flickered, then went out completely. I lit a few old lanterns and sat in the living room, listening to the wind claw at the windows. The rain had turned to sleet and the whole world felt frozen in time. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the last thing Emily ever said to me in person. I couldn't. The next morning, I found the message carved beneath the floorboards of the barn. It was only visible because a board had snapped during the prep work. I lifted the others carefully and found a shallow cavity lined with plastic sheeting. Inside was a small fireproof box. I took it into the house and opened it with shaking hands. There were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me. Most were unopened, postmarked from places I never lived, dated after she disappeared. Each one started the same. "Sam, I know you won't believe me, but I had no choice." The rest was pain. Explanations I didn't want. Confessions I couldn't unhear. She had left because she feared for my life, because she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to see. She believed Colton was involved in something dangerous, extortion, arson for hire, things that had crept into our little town while I was too busy running into real fires to notice the metaphorical ones. In one of the final letters, she wrote, "He said if I didn't disappear, you'd end up like Jacob." Jacob, a volunteer firefighter from our old station, died in a suspicious house fire 6 months before Emily vanished. We all thought it was faulty wiring. Now I wasn't so sure. I spent the rest of that day pacing the house, weighing what to do. Call the state police? Send the letters to a journalist? I didn't trust anyone local anymore. This town was too small, too quiet, and too easy to bury the truth in. But I did know one thing. The barn wasn't coming down yet. Not until I finished what Emily started. Not until I got the full truth. And not until I made sure Colton paid the price for whatever he did. That night, I went back to the loft. Sat where the blankets had been. Watched the storm light the distant horizon in flashes. I wasn't a firefighter anymore, but I still knew how to start a fire. And how to make sure the right things survived it. And just like Emily wrote, I would watch the fire. The next morning broke with the kind of dense iron gray sky that feels like it's pressing down on the earth. Fog clung to the fields like wet wool, and the barn looked more like a relic from a dream than something real. I stood at the edge of the gravel drive, staring at it while my coffee went cold in my hand. My thoughts were still tangled in the words from Emily's letters. All those years, she hadn't vanished without a trace. She had left a trail, carefully hidden, just enough for someone like me to find, someone who knew how to listen for what wasn't said. I had always thought of Colton as a straight-shooting kind of guy. He was loyal, grounded. But looking back, I began to piece it together, the way he avoided certain topics, the shift in his tone whenever someone mentioned budget changes at the firehouse, the way he drank a little too much whenever there was talk of audits or inspections. And now I had a box of evidence that painted a much darker picture. Still, I needed more. If I was going to expose him, I couldn't rely on handwritten letters and photos alone. The town wouldn't believe it. They loved Colton. He coached youth baseball, attended every pancake breakfast, and knew every widow by name. I needed something that couldn't be denied. I decided to search the barn again, this time slowly, carefully, as if it were a crime scene. I wore gloves and brought a flashlight even in the daylight. The floorboards creaked beneath me like tired bones. In the far corner, near where the livestock pens used to be, I noticed a section of the wall where the boards didn't match. Newer nails, newer wood. Someone had repaired it recently. I pried the boards loose, one at a time, and behind them I found a small crawl space. It was cramped, barely large enough for someone to lie down in, but there were signs of use. More food wrappers, a flashlight with dying batteries, and an old spiral notebook. Inside were scribbled notes, times, names, locations. Some of them were code, but some were unmistakable. Arson dates, insurance payouts, property owners, and a symbol in the margin I recognized, the county fire department's emblem. One entry was underlined 3 times. Parkland Storage, July 3rd. Controlled burn for payout. Signed off by CB Colton Brigg. That was all the confirmation I needed, but there was one more name listed, at the very bottom of the page, barely legible in smeared ink. Sam. Next. My chest tightened as I read it again. Emily hadn't just run away. She had been protecting me, and someone, Colton or someone close to him, had been planning something worse if she didn't stay gone. I pocketed the notebook and backed out of the crawl space, brushing dust from my jeans. My phone buzzed as I stepped outside. A text from an unknown number. "You're digging too deep. Walk away." No name. No hint of where it came from. Just the warning. My first instinct was to march straight to the sheriff's office and confront him, but I'd already tried that once. If he felt cornered, he might make things worse. He was no longer the boy I grew up with. He was a man with secrets and apparently reach. Instead, I called in a favor. There was a guy I knew from my old department, Marcus, who'd moved on to the state fire marshal's office. We hadn't spoken in years, but when I told him what I had, and that I suspected official corruption tied to fire reports and insurance fraud, he agreed to drive out. Said he could be there in 2 days. That night, I slept with the front door locked, a loaded flare gun on the table next to the couch. Not because I expected a fire, but because the idea of irony didn't feel far-fetched anymore. The next morning, someone had slashed the tires on the excavator. It wasn't even subtle. All 4 were shredded clean through. It would take at least a week to replace them, assuming the rental company could even get them out this far. I called to report the damage and told them to delay the pickup. I wasn't done with the barn yet. Instead, I spent the day at the library downtown. The place hadn't changed much. Still smelled like dust and old wood polish. I went through old newspaper clippings, scanning for the names and dates I'd found in the notebook. One by one, the pattern came into focus. Fires that had been ruled accidental almost always involved properties in financial trouble. Some of the owners were friends of Colton's. A few were former members of the town council, and the payouts always seemed to arrive just in time to save someone's business, or fund a campaign, or buy a new piece of land. But one article stood out. A barn fire from 6 years ago. No injuries. Property had been empty for years. But the report listed the fire as suspicious and mentioned that the volunteer responder on scene, Jacob, had filed for a full investigation. A week later, Jacob was dead. Accidental kitchen fire. No foul play suspected. Except now, I knew better. Back at the house, I added the article to my growing file. I felt like I was putting together a jigsaw puzzle with no edges. Every piece led to another. But time was running out. The developer was calling every day now, asking when the demolition would be finished. I kept telling them soon, and I meant it. The barn would come down, but only after it served its final purpose. That night, I walked the property line thinking. The wind had died and the air was unnaturally still. In the distance, I could see the flicker of headlights approaching. A truck pulled up slowly. I recognized it immediately. Colton. He didn't get out. Just rolled the window down and called across the yard. "You don't want to do this, Sam." I didn't answer. He tried again. "You don't understand how deep this goes. You think you're going to bring justice? All you'll do is ruin lives, maybe your own." I stepped closer. You already ruined mine. He stared at me. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel the weight of them. Then he threw something out the window. It landed in the dirt with a soft thud. I waited until he drove off before I picked it up. It was Emily's bracelet, the one she wore the day she disappeared. That night, I knew I wouldn't sleep again. I stayed up reading every letter Emily had written. I didn't just want revenge, I wanted justice. I wanted the truth to burn as bright as the lies had. But more than anything, I wanted to know that whatever happened next would be for her. Marcus arrived the next day. Unmarked car, plain clothes, sharp eyes. I handed him everything, the letters, the notebook, the photos, the article. He read them in silence. When he was done, he looked at me and said, "You weren't paranoid. You were targeted." He told me he'd start the formal investigation, but needed a few days to loop in the right departments. Said he couldn't guarantee safety until they had warrants. I nodded. I understood what he wasn't saying. I would need to buy time. And maybe make a final move. That night, I rigged the barn with controlled burn lines. Not real explosives, nothing illegal, just a precise setup using old fire gel compounds, accelerants in sealed containers, and a fuse line designed to delay ignition. It was something we used in training exercises, simulate structural collapse without endangering the area. It wouldn't damage the fields, wouldn't hurt anyone nearby, but it would send a message. Before I lit anything, I placed a waterproof box under the floorboards. Copies of the letters, the notebook, the photos, the article. I emailed Marcus the location and told him to retrieve it if something happened. Then I stood outside the barn and watched the last sliver of twilight disappear behind the ridge. My finger hovered over the ignition trigger. Not yet. One more thing. I took Emily's bracelet and hung it from the loft window, where the light would catch it as the barn fell. Then I stepped back, and I waited. The barn would come down, but it wouldn't just be wood and nails crashing to the earth. It would be the weight of years of silence, betrayal, secrets. It would be a signal. The storm was coming back, and I was ready. The wind shifted just after midnight. I could feel it in the trees, the way their limbs stirred uneasily in the dark, leaves rustling like whispers among ghosts. The storm had returned, as if summoned. Low thunder echoed across the valley, distant but growing louder. The barn stood tall, still, waiting, as if it knew its time was near. I stayed on the porch for hours, my hand resting on the ignition switch tucked in my coat pocket. I watched the field like a sentry, and just after 2 a.m., I saw movement. Shadows crossing where they shouldn't, slow and deliberate. 2 figures. One tall, broad-shouldered, the other smaller, lean. They circled the barn, flashlights low, cautious. I didn't need a closer look to know who they were. Colton and Travis. Travis had been my cousin once removed, used to help out at the station back when he was barely 20. Quiet, eager to please. I never thought of him as dangerous, but people change, especially when loyalty gets twisted into something darker. I stayed still, watching, listening. "I told you," Colton hissed, his voice sharp. "He knows. He has everything." Travis didn't answer. He just kicked a rock with his boot and muttered, "We should have finished it years ago." Colton crouched by the barn's south wall, near the crawl space I had already cleared. He pulled something from his jacket, a small gas canister. "We do it now. Burn it. With him if we have to." My breath caught in my chest. So it was true. All this time, they hadn't just covered up arson. They'd eliminated anyone who got too close. Jacob, Emily, almost me. I slid quietly from the porch and took the long way around the house, staying out of their line of sight. The rain started again, light but steady, making the ground soft under my boots. I circled until I reached the far edge of the barn, just out of the glow of their flashlights. Colton was kneeling now, pouring accelerant along the base of the structure. I took a deep breath and stepped into the light. "You really think fire's going to erase everything?" They both turned fast, Travis startled, Colton steady, like he'd been expecting me. "I warned you," Colton said, straightening. "You could have walked away." I stepped closer. and you could have left her alone." He laughed, bitter and cold. "She was never yours to begin with. You were just too blind to see it." Travis shifted, uncertain. "This isn't what we agreed. We said no one would get hurt." Colton shot him a look that silenced him. I saw my moment and reached into my coat pocket, not for the ignition switch, but for my phone. I raised it, screen glowing, recording everything. "Keep going," I said. "Say it all." Colton's expression cracked, just a flicker. "You think anyone will believe you? You're a washed-up firefighter with a grudge. I'm the sheriff. I am the law in this town." "And I'm the truth," I said quietly. "And it's all on file, sent to the state marshal. They'll be here by morning." He lunged. But I was faster. Not in the way I once was, not with the firehouse speed of my 20s, but fast enough. I hit the ignition trigger and ducked. The barn didn't explode. That wasn't the plan. Instead, it flared. From the carefully placed accelerants along the central beams, a wall of flame roared to life, bright and fast, controlled and precise, just like the training burns we used to run. It wasn't meant to destroy everything. It was meant to reveal what had been hidden. As the fire lit up the night, the symbol Emily had carved, hidden beneath an old layer of weathered paint, glowed in the flames. The same symbol I had seen in her notebook. A mark of resistance. The fire didn't spread. It climbed to the roofline, burned the empty hayloft where no one lived anymore, and consumed the lies that had festered there. Colton stumbled, back, face lit by firelight, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. "You just signed your own warrant," he spat. "No," I said, my voice calm. "You did. Years ago." Sirens pierced the night, distant but drawing closer. Not local. State Marcus had arrived. Travis dropped his flashlight and backed away, hands up. "I didn't know. I swear I thought it was insurance stuff." Colton tried to run, but I tackled him before he got 10 feet. The ground was wet, the mud deep, and we rolled, wrestling like boys in a backyard brawl, but this time, I didn't let him win. By the time the first unmarked vehicle pulled into the driveway, blue and red lights cutting through the mist, I had him pinned. Marcus jumped out, flanked by 2 others in official jackets. He didn't say a word, just nodded at me, then it turned to the others. "Take him." Colton fought, shouted about conspiracy and betrayal, but they cuffed him anyway. Travis didn't resist. He just sat in the grass and cried. It was over. Almost. The fire team doused the remaining flames. The barn was half standing, blackened but intact enough to see what had been hidden. A judge would see it too when they came to investigate. The emblems, the markings, the physical evidence left in the crawl space, I hadn't cleared completely. Marcus had the rest. I stood alone by dawn, watching the last embers cool. The bracelet still hung from the loft window. Smoke curled around it like a ribbon. I climbed the ladder and took it down carefully, wrapping it in a cloth before tucking it into my coat pocket. Later that morning, the developer called. I told them the barn would be cleared within the week. They didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer answers. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. Emily's grave was on a hill behind the house, unmarked except for a carved piece of slate I'd placed there years ago when I thought she was never coming home. Now I knelt beside it, placed the bracelet on the stone, and closed my eyes. I did what I could, I whispered. I wish it had been sooner. The wind rustled through the grass. Peaceful this time, no storm in sight. I sold the house 2 weeks later, donated the rest of the land to the county for conservation. The barn was cleared out, but I left the foundation stones as a memorial. A reminder of what had been built, what had burned, and what had been reborn. I moved away quietly. No fanfare. Just a truck, the road, and a fresh start. But sometimes, when the air smells like rain and wood smoke, I remember the sound of that fire rising, the truth catching flame, and the woman who had believed in me even in silence. And I smile, not for what was lost, but for what was finally found. Justice and peace.